Welcome, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Food and Water Watch's February Livable Future Live. My name is Janine Shepard, and I am Food and Water Watch's Senior Manager of Philanthropy Events. I will be your host this evening, and I'm honored to be here with all of you. As people are joining, please take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to hear your name, where you're joining us from, and what brings you here today. For any of you new to Food and Water Watch, welcome. We are a national organization fighting for sustainable food, clean water, and a livable climate for all of us. We organize for grassroots activism at all levels of government, local, state, and federal, and we work to create the change and solutions we need. This year marks our 20th anniversary, and we are proud to have 20 years of wins for clean water, clean food, and a livable climate. We recently sat down and talked with our founder and executive director, Winona Howder, about the beginnings of Food and Water Watch, why this work is so essential, and what it takes to keep fighting when the odds are against us. We'll put a link to that article in the chat, and I encourage you all to check it out. I'm also excited to announce our upcoming benefit event. In celebration of our 20th anniversary and as a way to gather together in community and solidarity, we're holding a benefit event that I would love for you to join. We'll have a reception in New York City on May 6th and a virtual conference on May 13th. I'm excited to host keynote speakers Zephyr Teachout and Senator Cory Booker. Please consider joining us for both. I'll put a link in the chat. And for any of you new to Livable Future Live, welcome. This is our monthly virtual education series. Each month, we focus on a different topic relative to our livable future. Tonight, as you know, we will be talking about Trump's cuts and rollbacks and what they mean for our food and water. Next month, on Wednesday, March 19th, in honor of World Water Day, we'll be discussing microplastics in our water, the human health risks, and what we're doing to help communities test and remove these contaminants. I hope you will join us for that event. We'll put a sign up for that in the chat as well. A few notes about Zoom before we get started. If you'd like to turn on closed captioning to add subtitles to your screen, click Show Captions in your Zoom toolbar. We'll add instructions for that in the chat as well. Please use this chat box throughout the evening to share your thoughts and reactions to what you're hearing. The chat is also where we will share information and links, so keep an eye out for those. You'll also see a Q&A box. If you have questions for any of our speakers tonight, please put those in the Q&A box. And we do have time at the end that we will get to as many of your questions as we can. And finally, I am recording this event, and so I will share the recording with you in an email that I will send out tomorrow. As we'll be talking about tonight, it has already been a challenging year under a Trump presidency. But Food and Water Watch has a 20-year history of winning, and we're prepared to defend the strides we've made. We will continue to take on factory farms, protect our water from toxic chemicals, fight for a future free of fossil fuels, and stand up against corporate climate scams. As we'll talk about throughout this evening, it's in coming together and joining forces that we get this work done. There are many ways for you to get involved with our work, including making a donation, joining our volunteer network, and attending our events. We don't take any corporate funding, so we're not beholden to any special interests other than the health of our communities and our planet. Our support comes from people like you. Your support now, early in the year, makes us stronger for the many fights ahead. Thank you so much for your generosity. And with that, I'd like to introduce tonight's topic. We've all seen the headlines coming in with new atrocities announced multiple times a day. People who are already marginalized by our political system are being used as scapegoats. People are losing their jobs, medical care, and are in fear for our lives. Environmental protections we've fought long and hard for are under attack. And it's not only the details of these attacks that are overwhelming, it's overwhelming the speed at which this is all happening. Here at Food and Water Watch, we work to protect our food, water, and climate, but all of this is related. Tonight, I have Mark Schlossberg, Food and Water Watch's Managing Director of Public Affairs, Emily Worth, Managing Director of Organizing, and Thomas Meyer, Strategic Organizing Projects Director, to break down the political context of these attacks, to share tactics Food and Water Watch is taking to fight back, and to share how everyone on this call can take action against the Trump-Musk regime. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box. We have time set aside at the end for Q&A. So let me start off by introducing Mark Schlossberg, Food and Water Watch's Managing Director of Public Affairs. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, great to be here.
Mark, we're here tonight to discuss the attacks on our food and water, but we're seeing attacks well beyond food and water. And I've heard you say that they're all related. Can you break that down for us? How are you framing the broad scope of attacks, what we're seeing right now, and how are they all related to the work that we're doing? And what is Food and Water Watch's role in fighting these attacks?
Yeah, that's a big question, and thanks so much. It's good to be here with all of you in these really troubling times. With everything that's happening in our country, it's always good to be on with hundreds of good-hearted people getting together to make positive change happen. And in this current context, we really have to be there for one another as we push back against this really terrible and regressive agenda. What Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing to the federal government is lawless, unprecedented, and going to have significant impacts on our food, water, health, and environment. We can and we must fight back to stop their agenda, but to do so will require all of us, and it will require understanding exactly what they're doing and why. What Musk and Trump are doing may look like chaos or pointless or even stupid, but it's all very intentional. Their goal is to dismantle the core functions of government as a prelude to looting it and privatizing it. And they are scapegoating some of the most vulnerable communities in vile and disgusting ways to distract from their core economic agenda. They use coded language around DEI and attack immigrants and trans people as part of this effort. These actions must be strongly opposed. And at the same time, they're engaging in a flurry of activity, as was just mentioned, to overwhelm us. They want us to be depressed and left with the feeling that there's nothing we can do, that their agenda is inevitable, and that resistance is futile. But we can beat back their agenda. To do so, we must be strategic and relentless, and it requires understanding what they're actually trying to do. The Musk-Trump agenda is a confluence of long-standing right-wing anti-government ideology coupled with a strain of anti-democratic thought coming from parts of Silicon Valley that envisions a concentration of power in an all-powerful CEO-type president. This anti-government ideology on the right goes back decades. Grover Norquist, a key lobbyist who headed up Americans for Taxpayer Reform, famously said he wanted to shrink the government to be so small it could be drowned in a bathtub. And this mentality has flowed through Heritage's Project 2025, which provides the blueprint for doing this. On the tech side, a programmer named Curtis Yarvin began espousing ideas for radically changing our system of government with a break things Silicon Valley mentality. His anti-democratic ideas for concentrated corporate power have been mirrored by the likes of Peter Thiel, a mentor and key supporter of J.D. Vance, and also by Elon Musk. A link in the chat will take you to a video from Gil Duran, former communications director to Attorney General Kamala Harris and former opinion page editor for Sacramento Bee. Don't go to this video now, just copy the link and save it for later and watch it afterwards. But this video breaks down exactly what's happening. Trump brought these two strains together and has given Elon Musk virtually unchecked power to take a wrecking ball to the federal government. The goal is not to find inefficiency, to surgically make cuts to lower spending and make things run better. The goal is to break the ability of the government to perform basic functions and to remove all protections for workers, consumers, and the environment as they enrich themselves and their friends, basically to transfer up wealth from the vast majority of Americans to a small class of billionaire oligarchs and to privatize everything else. This agenda is evident when you look at what they've done. They put freezes on federal spending, and they've indiscriminately fired federal workers. They invited all federal workers to resign regardless of skill, experience, background, etc. And they've dismantled congressionally approved agencies like USAID and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And despite Trump's pseudo-populist rhetoric, they've attacked workers by neutering the National Labor Relations Board, and the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. On core food and water issues, they've shuttered the environmental justice divisions in the Department of Justice and the EPA, and they've scrubbed websites of important information. And they've already set us back significantly on climate. One specific rule that they're trying to undo protects our water from toxic lead contamination. We can stop this, as my colleague will talk about in a little bit. And the budget, which I'll also talk about later, would slash a variety of critical food and water programs, including threatening food safety, assistance, and water infrastructure. And all of this is being done to provide tax breaks for billionaires and corporations. So that's a lot. What can we do about this? Well, Food and Water Watch has never backed down from a fight, and we're not about to now. We know from 20 years of winning uphill battles against impossible odds that people power can beat back corporate power. If we are strategic, relentless, and determined, we can win. Republicans hold just a 3-vote majority in the House, the most narrow since 1931. Many of the things that Musk and Trump are trying to do are incredibly unpopular. Cuts to food safety, cuts to clean water, cuts to food assistance, cuts to clean energy, and beyond that, cutting Medicaid and Medicare, incredibly popular programs. We will work on core food and water issues and ally with other organizations to put tremendous pressure on these members of Congress. And we have you, our members and supporters, who are so critical in this effort. Already thousands of you have messaged your members of Congress, made phone calls, donated, and volunteered. The response to Musk-Trump from Democratic leadership thus far has been anemic. Far, 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 far less than what needs to happen. Many of Trump's nominees have sailed through with Democratic support. Senators are not using all the procedural tools in their toolbox to slow his agenda. And House Minority Leader Jeffries has talked about how little leverage Democrats have rather than rallying the country around a clear message. But congressional phone lines are burning up with calls from people like you across the country, and more Democratic leaders are starting to step up. What you do, what we do together matters. Together, we can build a robust opposition to Musk-Trump agenda and prevent it from being implemented. We have a long road ahead, and what Musk, Trump, and their allies are doing is causing significant damage. But with a robust strategy that we all engage in, we can overcome the veneer of inevitability that they're trying to create. We can shift public opinion, and we can engender massive public opposition and pressure on members of Congress, and we can protect our food, water, health, and democracy.
Thank you, Mark. One thing that you said really struck me and is still sticking with me, the idea that they want us to feel depressed and to think that their agenda is inevitable and the resistance is futile. And that's part of why they're doing so much so fast to overwhelm us, but we can beat back their agenda. So thank you for that reminder and thank you for that overview. Next, I want to introduce you to our Strategic Projects Director, Thomas Meyer. Thomas, let me get you here. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone.
Thomas, we just talked about how the current administration is trying to overwhelm us and make us depressed. Tonight, we're going to talk about ways we can all take action against the attacks we're facing. But before we get there, this is going to be a long haul. How do we move past that feeling of overwhelm and depression?
Yeah, great question. I feel like I'm discussing basically the same point with a different person in my life basically every day. Thank you all for joining us. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat. If you were on our call in November after the election, I shared some of these tips and an article about staying grounded and healthy in these really challenging times. And those tips are all still relevant and have been good reminders for me and I think our other staff and volunteers. So we'll put up a slide now, but I'm just going to summarize in five tips. So first one is just affirm you have something to offer. Like Mark said, there are many, many different ways to get involved. Lots of people are taking action, whether it's calling or writing your member of Congress, working at the local level, showing up to protests, donating to groups, either your time or some money, lots of different ways. Everybody has different things to offer, different skills and abilities and interests. So just remind yourself of what those are for you. The next is to get real about power. Obviously, Trump and Musk and Republicans in Congress do have power. They have the majority right now, but they don't have unlimited power. And we also have a lot of power. And so we're going to talk later about how Food and Water Watch is sort of assessing the landscape of where we have power, where our coalition partners have power, where we need to build power in order to win, and stop these dangerous attacks over the next few years. So just a real sober assessment of where we do and don't and need to build more power. The third one, especially important sort of immediately after the election, but this is constantly changing, is to see the new political ecology and know your path in it. So by political ecology, that basically means what's the landscape? Who are all the actors? How are they interacting with each other? Are different institutions, within kind of the progressive ecosystem? How are the groups working together? What approaches are they taking? Again, just an assessment of where we're at, and also understanding your role in it. So that applies at the individual level, but also at the organizational level. And I'll talk about how Food and Water Watch is approaching this organizationally. The next one's pretty straightforward. We are stronger in numbers, so get with your friends, get with your neighborhood association, your local organization of some kind. You're all here tonight with Food and Water Watch, and we have amazing volunteers who work with our organizers and other staff all around the country. So I hope that you're engaged with Food and Water Watch in some way in the real world, in addition to being on this call. But wherever you are and whoever your people are, working together with others is always really important. And then lastly is just be ready for the long haul. I'm a distance runner. We got to pace ourselves. Take care of yourself. I'm always reminding myself and colleagues, drink water, take a stretch break, take a walk, do the little things to keep yourself grounded and kind of sane. These tips are one way to do that, but then there's other things as well. Maybe you read the news for a certain amount of time each day, but not, don't try to drink from the fire hose each day. That's probably too much. So a summary for this is basically that action is the antidote to despair. And it's a little bit cliche. I think Joan Baez said that, but it really is true. Taking action, getting involved, even in small ways, is probably the thing to help keep you grounded and focused. So I'll return to number 3 here, knowing our path in the political ecology, to just talk about what Food and Water Watch is doing. We're trying to get really clear about what we have to offer. We have amazing staff and volunteers, but ultimately limited time and resources. There's only, so many dollars in the bank account, so many hours in the day, so many people that we're working with. So we have to be clear about what we have to offer and assess the power that we have, the places that we need to build more, and get ready for the long fight ahead. So for us, that means really focusing and being strategic about where and when and what we do to fight back against Trump's dangerous policies. We have always believed that by organizing regular people, we can hold elected officials accountable and therefore win real concrete victories. And that hasn't changed. Who's in office comes and goes, but that core approach and strategy hasn't changed. So it's important to take action everywhere. All of you, I saw in the chat, people are here from all over the country. We've seen rallies and marches, and like Mark said, people, burning up the phone lines in Congress from all over the country. To be really strategic, we are trying to focus on a set of districts, congressional districts, where we feel like we have something to offer. So we have organizers or activists in the district, but also where there's a kind of political calculus, and specifically where a Republican won by a really small margin in 2024. I think we're going to see 5 here. So there's 435 members of the U.S. House. We are focusing not just on these 5, but I would say especially on these 5. So if you don't recognize them, we've got Tom Keene, New Jersey 7, Marionette Miller Meeks, Iowa 3, Ryan McKenzie, Pennsylvania 7, Zach Nunn, Iowa 1, and Mike Lawler, New York 17. So again, this is not the only representatives and districts that matter, but thinking about Food and Water Watch and what we have to offer, this is kind of our top tier of targets. There's actually 18 Republican members, so 13 in addition to these five, who won their races by less than 2.5%. So depending on the district, that could be just a few hundred votes. Marionette Miller Meeks, Iowa 3 there, she won her race by 799 votes to, maybe 10, 15,000, 10 or 15,000 votes. But still in a district of, typically 400, 500,000 people, 10,000 votes is a pretty narrow margin. So like I said, there's 18 members that fall into that category. Right now, the Republicans have a majority of like 2 or a margin between their numbers and the Democrats of just 2 or 3, depending on who's sick or who's missing work that day. But it's the smallest majority in the House since 1931, so in almost 100 years. So that means that they have to get all of the Republicans to agree on whatever they're trying to do. And as you might have seen already in the news, that's really hard to do. And we think that we can create kind of cracks in the facade by focusing on issues that everyone cares about, like safe food and water. The vast majority of people don't want corporations controlling and threatening our food and water, and they expect the government to work on their behalf to keep them safe. So that's what we're focusing on. So even though it feels like Trump and Republicans in the Congress are just rolling ahead and nothing can stop them, that isn't true. They're already working slower than they said they wanted to because of the resistance, and we obviously have a lot more to do. So we can stop the worst policies by really focusing in on these critical issues and by putting pressure, grassroots pressure, on specific members of Congress. And we're going to talk more a bit later about things you can do and kind of how this strategy fits in with the broader movement.
Thank you, Thomas. Action is the antidote to despair. I love that quote. Thank you for walking us through ways to stay grounded in community and solidarity and action. And thank you for walking through an overview of what Food and Water Watch strategic organizing vision and tactics are thinking about right now. Next, we're going to dive into some specific issues and campaigns that we're working on right now. And for that, I'd like to introduce Emily Worth. Emily, let me get you on here. Emily Worth is our organizing director. Emily, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you all for joining. I agree with Mark. It's really good to be among all of you whose also names I recognize in these really challenging times. And I know it's true for me that taking action and thinking about how we can take action in the future is really the only way I'm getting through these really troubling times. But I'm here to talk about some of the specific campaigns we're focusing on right now to take action. And the one I'll be talking about really fits into a lot of those criteria Thomas just described. It's funny, I've been thinking it's hard to believe we even have to work on this because Republicans in Congress have made a top priority trying to repeal a rule that was put in place by the Biden administration last October to get lead out of our drinking water. So the lead and copper rule improvements, we call it the lead out of water rule, it was a historic regulation passed last year to strengthen protections against lead in our drinking water. And it did this by requiring lead service lines that run to our homes and communities to be replaced over the next decade. And this was really important because it could protect millions of people from being exposed to lead in their drinking water. Lead service lines are the main source of exposure to lead in drinking water, and EPA estimates 9 million homes and properties are served through these lines across the country. And I'm sure many of you remember the terrible disaster in Flint, Michigan. And from that, we know there's just no safe level of lead in our drinking water, and it's especially dangerous for children. It can lead to developmental disorders, damage to nervous systems, and more. And there was testing that was done in 2021 of 1 million children in the US, and half of them showed detectable levels of lead in their blood. It's much more likely among poor children and children of color, referencing historical inequities. But this new rule, the EPA estimates, would have profound and measurable public health benefits. It would prevent risky low birth weight in up to 900,000 infants, like the social media image on this slide shows. It would prevent developmental disorders in up to 2,600 children, reduce 1,500 cases of premature heart disease. But all of these important public health benefits are at risk. And that's because the Republicans in Congress have recently introduced a bill. It's the House Joint Resolution 44. And its purpose is to repeal this historic lead out of water rule using something called the Congressional Review Act. The Congressional Review Act is a tool that Congress uses to overturn recently passed regulations of a previous administration. And they have a clock by which they have to do this. So it's within the first 60 days of the new Congress session that they have to act to overturn this. If they do overturn this rule, we'd go back to the rule that was under the previous Trump administration, and that was much weaker and would allow toxic lead pipes to stay in place much longer and endanger the health of literally millions of people. But what's even more concerning about this is that if Congress is able to use this Congressional Review Act to repeal this new rule, EPA may never be able to replace full lead service lines across the country. And that's because this act explicitly prohibits agencies from using substantially similar rules to the one that was repealed. So this could cause really permanent harm. So that's why we at Food and Water Watch think it's so critical that we stop this. And we actually do think that's possible. Because think about it, who supports more lead in drinking water? We think this is an issue that Thomas just mentioned would broadly appeal to people as long as they know that it's happening. And another important thing about this Congressional Review Act is that if it moves forward, every member of Congress will have to take an up or down vote on whether or not they support repealing this rule. Often we find in Congress that large bills with many different provisions are lumped together in one big package. And that makes it much harder for us to hold members accountable for what they're doing. So this one bill, this House Resolution 44, offers us an opportunity to hold our members of Congress accountable for their action. Are they for lead in drinking water or are they against it? And remember, both Mark and Thomas have mentioned we have this narrow Republican majority in the House. So we really only need 3 Republicans to vote no and stop this from going forward. So how are we going to fight back and do this? Thomas pointed to a few of the key Republican members of Congress that we're highlighting, and a number of criteria. I saw someone ask, how do we do this? A number of criteria were used to make these choices. We were thinking of where do people have lead pipes in their district? Which members of Congress are on these relevant committees? Where do we have organizers, volunteers, and members in the districts, in addition to how vulnerable they are? So what we've been doing since we found out about this is sending emails, thanks to many of you who've taken action. We've sent thousands of emails to Congress. We've pushed phone calls into the offices of key congressional districts by holding phone banks. Thanks if any of you have joined these. We've held 3 rallies in key districts. There's a picture here of one we held in New Pennsylvania 7, Ryan McKenzie's office. We also held rallies in Mike Lawler's district, New York 17, and Tom Kane Jr. in New Jersey 7. These rallies, we also had a chance to meet with the local staff, ask them their position on the bill. We got really great earned media coverage from these. Some of our volunteers were able to write letters to the editor in their local media outlets after these stories. And I'll say that we've already gotten one of these members of Congress, Mike Lawler, to report to the media that he opposes this bill. So this is what, we believe that if we continue to do actions like this and hold other vulnerable members of the House accountable, that we can build enough pressure and backlash from their constituents, we can stop this from moving forward. And in fact, this week, the House is in a recess again. Members are back in district. We're again working to organize rallies, and we're asking some of our members who are constituents in key districts to drop letters at offices of the members of Congress during this recess. We know that these in-person contacts in the district are a powerful way to reach members of Congress. Thomas will talk a little bit more in a few minutes about how you can get involved and help with that if you're interested. And again, this is our way of fighting back strategically. So I know after hearing everything that Mark shared, that seems like just one very small issue among all the terrible things happening right now. But it is a way that we can demonstrate the concrete ways that this current Congress and administration are taking actions that are harmful to the health and well-being of people. And again, like I said, it's an opportunity to hold members accountable for their specific actions, many of which we think are very unpopular, so that we can push some of them to not go along with this and to stop bad things from happening. All of this resistance is going to take a sustained effort. Like Thomas said, this is a marathon, but we are ready to work with all of you to stand up and fight back. So I hope you'll join us. And now Mark is going to tell us a little bit about another very concerning issue that we're following closely around the budget cuts at the federal level. So I'll turn it over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Emily. Emily talked about a very important issue of the lead pipe issue. As I mentioned at the top, and as she mentioned, there's a bigger, an even larger fight that's coming up, and that is going to be about the budget. What Musk and Trump are doing right now is causing chaos and trying to break departments. What the budget process is going to do is a fight over, are we going to be able to make that, are they going to be able to make that permanent, and are they going to be able to transfer the wealth from ordinary people to billionaires and large corporations? Budget measures have been introduced in both the House and the Senate, and they will be using a process called reconciliation to attempt to gut federal spending in order to give these massive tax cuts to billionaires. Normally in the Senate, because of the filibuster, 60 votes are really required to pass something. And a filibuster can only be overcome with the vote of 60 people. And because Republicans only hold 53 votes in the Senate, Democrats could normally block legislation from moving forward and force some kind of a compromise. But with reconciliation, once a year, the Senate can vote on a tax and spending bill with a simple majority vote. So Republicans are going to try to use this process to ram through massive cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, defund agencies that they're already trying to unilaterally shutter, and make additional massive and haphazard cuts. This will be devastating for our food and water if it's able to go through, and here's why. Specifically, it will mean more unsafe food. According to the Center for Disease Control, 48 million people get sick, 128,000 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die from foodborne diseases in the United States each year. We already don't have enough inspectors, food and safety inspectors, and Musk, Trump are gunning for cuts that will result in even less inspectors. More people will get sick and die if these cuts go forward. It means cuts to food assistance. The House has proposed $230 billion in cuts, with at least $150 billion in cuts to Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. SNAP benefits help feed more than 40 million low-income people in the United States every year. It would mean cuts to agencies charged with addressing things like bird flu. The Animal Plant Health Inspection Service is part of the CDC. It's charged with protecting the health of U.S. agriculture and natural resources against invasive pests and diseases, including bird flu, which is currently spreading. Millions of birds have been infected, and as of late January, 65 cases had been transmitted to humans, including one death. This disease, coupled with price gouging, has caused egg prices to skyrocket. We need a strong federal response to get bird flu under control, and cuts to these services and those charged with doing that will result in even more disease and even higher costs. It also could mean higher food prices. The Federal Trade Commission is charged with enforcement of civil and antitrust law and consumer protection. Among other things, it's supposed to safeguard against unfair competition in the food sector. And this is a sector where there has historically been extreme consolidation, in part due to a lack of resources, which has reduced consumer choice and lead to unfair prices for farmers and ranchers. For example, just 4 companies control 85% of beef production. Anyway, in recent years, the FTC has started to take a stand for consumers, intervening, for example, to stop the Kroger-Albertsons merger after finding that that would have led to worse competition and cost consumers more money at the grocery store. Cutting the FTC funding would only benefit large corporations and hurt consumers by reducing choice and increasing prices. And finally, cuts to funding for safe and clean water. Cuts to the EPA and less staffing at the EPA will lead to more toxic pollution impacting our water. And also on the table is cuts to water infrastructure. Last year, House Republicans passed legislation to cut funding for water infrastructure through the state revolving fund programs by 25% to the lowest levels in more than 15 years. And this year's proposals may be even worse. They have also proposed removing critical tax exemptions that allow local governments to finance water projects to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. There are more than 7 million cases of waterborne diseases in the United States every year, and as a result of these diseases, 100,000 people are hospitalized and over 6,000 people die each year. Cuts will just make this worse. That's just a few examples. We can defeat these efforts in the House, though, by strategically organizing to hold all Democratic members to vote against the budget and pressure the same key Republican members that we've been talking about to vote against this. Remember, these things are incredibly unpopular. Cutting these programs will be incredibly unpopular both among Democratic and Republican voters. Now I'm going to kick it over to Thomas, who's going to share some things that you can do to help bring the pressure and stop these cuts from happening.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Lots of things to do. And I know, again, just seeing familiar names and faces in the chat that people are already doing a lot of things. We wanted to offer just a couple quick things. One is we are starting, this isn't the catchiest name necessarily, but we're calling it Resistance Reminders. On via a simple text. So if you have a cell phone, if you want to get one text a week with 2 or 3 simple actions to take, then just text the number 23321 and the word resist. We're going to start this coming Monday. We'll probably send a simple text on Monday with like a couple things to do. So it might be call your member of Congress about this specific thing, send a message, maybe share something with friends or on social media, ask friends to do this simple thing, attend an event. We'll just put a couple things in that text and send it once a week. So if you've got your phone out, do that now, and we're going to start that next week. Another thing, like Emily mentioned, Congress is in their districts, at least in theory. They're not in DC this week. So we already have a number of events planned, especially in these key districts that we've mentioned, but really everyone everywhere can go to your member of Congress's district office and deliver a letter. We have a couple of template letters, one on the lead pipe rule and one on the extreme funding cuts that you can update, you can address, you can add to, sign your name, and go with a handful of other people, by yourself, with a larger group. Just show up in person. With all of the calls and emails that are going to member of Congress, showing up in person is a great way to kind of break through the noise. So Kaya just put a link in the chat, and you can sign up there. We will send you the toolkit with the template letters. Tomorrow and Friday especially are important because the members of Congress are in districts. So even if you don't catch them in person, they're going to be going to their district offices. It's more likely that this connection gets made. Another thing to do, and this is related to the first thing, if you text 23321, text the word resist, this is kind of a preview of what you get. The first thing we're going to ask for is your zip code if we don't already have it. That way we can tell you about specific things happening in your state or your congressional district. If you send us your zip code, then you'll get a reminder for the first thing you can do, which is to send a message to Congress to oppose these extreme and illegal funding cuts. So that's a quick thing you can do if you haven't done it already. And I saw a question about emailing it. I think Janine will send a follow-up email with these and everything else that we mentioned tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Emily and Mark, I'll invite you to turn your cameras back on as well. I just want to thank all three of you. We are going to take questions here in a minute, but let me just bring you back on here so we can say thank you. I just want to say thank you to all three of you for sharing all of this tonight. And I want to say thank you to everyone on this call as well. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being a part of our community and part of what makes this all happen. As these three have demonstrated this evening and every day, Food and Water Watch is hard at work. We're fighting attacks on our food and water every day. One of the ways that you can move this work forward is by supporting us with a donation, and we'll put a link in the chat. I just want to say that especially at the beginning of the year like this, every dollar that you give helps to move this work forward. So whether you give a one-time gift or sign up to give monthly, your generosity helps fuel this fight. Thank you again for your generosity. I see that a number of questions have come in, and as a reminder, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please put those in the Q&A box so that we are sure to see them, and we'll get to as many questions as we can for the remainder of our time here. Let me click over to the questions. All right, we have lots of questions coming in. And let's start off with, we have a number of questions about the EPA. So let's start with a question for you, Mark. Do you feel that Congress can save the EPA?
Yeah, absolutely. The EPA is a congressionally authorized agency. It's funded by Congress. It was set up by Congress. And it's an important agency. What Musk and Trump are doing is they're trying to do two things. One is they're doing a lot of actions that have been found to be illegal and have been held up in the courts. And they're doing things at a breakneck speed in an attempt to make things seem inevitable, as I mentioned. And I think that leads to questions like, is the EPA going to be abolished? Well, I mean, they don't have the power to abolish the EPA. That would require Congress abolishing the EPA, and Congress is not going to do that because we're going to fight to make sure that they don't do that. I don't think that there's a majority of the votes in the House to abolish the EPA. There's many districts across the country where people benefit from important environmental protection that the EPA provides. Everybody in the United States benefits from important environmental protections that the EPA provides. And so, yes, I think there's going to be an EPA. Now, what Trump and Musk are doing to the agencies of government is very dangerous. And what they're trying to do is get people to resign. They're trying to gut our agencies so that they can't be effective. We need to fight back against that. And I know the federal workers unions are fighting against that as well. And we're standing obviously in solidarity with them. And we have it at actions in DC, and we will continue to. And there's litigation going on around those issues. But in terms of funding and keeping the EPA going, that's absolutely essential. We will keep the EPA going, and we'll fight all the actions to gut it and strip it of its abilities.
Thank you, Mark.
I don't know if Emily or Thomas have other things to add to that, but that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, so you mentioned our legal team. I'm going to hand the next question to Emily. Emily, can you talk a little bit about the role of our legal team here at Food and Water Watch?
Yeah, the legal team plays a critical role in our work, but right now they're really poring over all of these Trump executive orders, efforts to reverse regulations, and looking at how the administration's dealing with pending court cases on our food, water, and climate issues. So they're monitoring all this closely. We anticipate the administration will move. I think there was news coming out today to reverse rules under the National Environmental Policy Act, some of which have been in place since the 1970s. So we are monitoring all of that closely. I saw some questions about working with other groups. We work in coalition with other organizations and their legal teams to work together and make sure we're combining our efforts on the legal front to fight back most strategically as we can. And we'll be continuing to do that and carefully figure out where we can engage in strategic lawsuits as needed. And so it's almost too soon for some of these updates, and I think our legal team will have a much more to offer in coming Livable Future Live going forward.
Thank you. Let's see, let's move to taking action on a local level. What can we do on a local level to help curb these agendas? Thomas, can I give that one to you?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to kind of combine this with a question that just popped up about from Carol Ann about if you don't happen to live in one of the 5 districts we mentioned, because it's an important thing to clarify. The letter deliveries I mentioned happening this week and beyond. Actually, some are happening next week too. Going to the district office of your member of Congress is a great thing to do locally. I often say, didn't come up with this, there's a million bumper stickers that say the same thing. All politics is local. So there's federal issues, right, that are decided by Congress, but each of our members of Congress has a relatively small district that they have to worry about, and a relatively small number of constituents that they have to pay attention to. And so going to the district offices, whether it's in person, like I said, with a couple other people, or by yourself with those letters, throwing up a rally, things like that, those are all important. I know there's been lots of rallies happening around the country. You can also push your local elected officials that are making decisions at either the state or the city or county level to support or implement policies that either push back sort of symbolically, speaking out against the Trump administration, but also to actually do things concretely that will protect people or improve people's lives in the face of the terrible things that are being proposed at the federal level. So like I said, there's lots of different ways to get involved. But keep in mind that everybody's got a district office, at least one, sometimes several district offices for their specific member of Congress. If you don't happen to be in one of those 5 districts I mentioned, it's still important to go to your member of Congress's office, even if your member of Congress is a Democrat. I live in Seattle. My member of Congress is like pretty good, but she's not perfect all the time. And we've shown up at her office and had meetings with her staff and gotten phone calls into her office to push her to be better on certain things over the years. We need Democrats to be pushing back more forcefully and to be strategic and not pretend like this is kind of a normal administration where everything is just going to work out if we negotiate with the Republicans. That's clearly not what's going to happen. So pushing on your member of Congress at the local level, regardless of where you live or which district you're in, is really important.
Yeah, thank you. And just to remind people, if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A. If you're putting it in the chat, I may not see it. There's another box called Q&A, so please make sure your questions are going in the Q&A if you'd like them to be on our list. Thomas, I think you may have talked about this a little bit, but there's one really direct question I just want to throw right back to you, which is, do petitions make any difference?
Great question. I think everything makes a difference. It's really just a matter of scale. So when something is very, very, very quick and easy, and lots of people do it very quickly and easily, it makes a difference, but it's smaller. So lots of people will sign an online petition, right? So members of Congress get lots of them. They know that it's very easy for people to do. It is registered, but it doesn't have the same impact as making a phone call, right? We say, call your member of Congress. I think that's a good baseline thing to do in addition, maybe to signing one of our petitions. Showing up in person is another step up, right? So if you go to a town hall, or if you go to the district office, or you go to a rally, that's kind of another step up. If you're organizing other people, if you're asking people, out at a farmer's market or at another event or at your meeting to sign a petition or to make a call, that's another step, right? It's not just you're magnifying your impact. If you're organizing other events and doing again, bringing more people involved, that's going to have an even greater impact. So don't think of it as, is this good or bad, or this works or this doesn't. It all has an impact. It's about how much time you have and what you can contribute. And Janine mentioned donating to Food and Water Watch. If you can't donate your time, or just a little bit of your time, a little bit of money helps us reach more people, and organize people to do all of these different activities that we're talking about.
Thank you. Let's see, how about this one? What are the tools Congress should be using now but is not to fight this craziness?
Yeah, I can take that. And Emily and Thomas can chime in if I miss things. But there's a lot of things that that members of Congress can be doing. In the Senate, for example, there's a lot of procedural rules that they could be utilizing to the full extent to slow things down. This is an agenda that relies on moving very fast, breaking things, and getting everything done quickly. Senators could, for starters, vote against all of the Trump nominees. They can, do things like call a quorum call, which would require all the Republicans, or almost all the Republicans, to be present physically, which would slow things down. They could call for roll call votes and everything. They could deny unanimous consent, which is basically saying, oh, we'll just let it go along without a real vote on motions. Beyond that, they could really provide a robust and unified message about what's happening, and they could get out there and raise the country to rally against what's happening. They shouldn't just be sitting back and saying, well, what leverage do we have? They should be going into congressional districts across the country. They should be talking about what is actually happening, how it's going to impact ordinary people, and then they should be putting forward a strong, robust, progressive agenda that really centers everyday Americans, everyday people, over the billionaires, and call that for what it is. So all those things should be happening. Members of the House could do that as well. And so those are the kind of things that really a robust opposition party would be doing in the face of an impending oligarchic coup.
The other thing, I'll just add to that is, we saw this just earlier today. Our policy director mentioned that Democrats would be able, similar to what Mark said, kind of through procedural means in the Senate, to force a vote on something that Republicans are all going to vote against. And they're in the minority, right? We don't expect, while we're going to push for some Republicans to flip, they won't on a lot of things. But there's a benefit to doing that. If Democrats can force a vote, it takes up time, like Mark said. Slowing things down is in our benefit. And the other thing is it forces Republicans to be on the issue, be on the record on a bad issue. I was looking at questions, so Mark might have already mentioned this, but they're going to try and put a lot of things into one big bill. And that's sort of difficult to negotiate, but it means that Republicans can sort of claim, oh, I voted for the whole bill, but I didn't really support this one piece of it. If Democrats force them to take votes on specific things, that's a way that their constituents can hold them accountable. So there's just more that Democrats should be doing, and so that's why I say, even if you're Democratic member, or if your member is Democratic, we got to push them to do more. We gotta sort of lead by example, and have them join us in fighting all this stuff.
Yeah, thank you. I have an interesting question here I want to ask from Emily, asking why aren't the representatives and senators doing these things? Any thoughts on that? I don't know who should take that one, or maybe we just.
I think they're.
Oh, go ahead, Thomas.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of norms in. Emily lives in DC. I used to live in DC. There's a lot of like norms in DC that rely on kind of like go along to get along, and work behind the scenes, work collegially, and And like our orientation as organizers is to do things publicly, to bring more people into the process and all of that. And there's a handful of members of Congress that are really good at this and that understand this, but most of them are politicians in the sense that they go in there and they think, okay, it's my job here to govern, and that's my job, and it's not the public's job, right? And they just think that they're sort of behaving as if this is kind of normal times. And so we've started to see more politicians, I think, kind of stepping out and behaving as if this is not normal times. But clearly they are following the lead of all of the millions of people that are calling their offices and rallying in the streets. And so that's what we need more of. The other thing is I heard I saw Chris Hayes, who's on MSNBC. He has a new book about attention and sort of the attention economy and all this kind of stuff, and says that Republicans think that all attention is good. Like Donald Trump gets a lot of negative attention. Democrats seem to think no attention is better than negative attention, and so they're very risk averse. And so I think we need to push them to do more things publicly, to try take some big swings in opposition to what Trump is doing, and they'll probably have a lot of support from people like us if they do that, but they're going to have to be pushed.
I'll also say one other thing just really quickly. I know we're running out of time. Is the role of money in politics can't be understated. And you have a fight right now between a handful of billionaire oligarchs and the vast majority of the population. But a lot of Democratic politicians have also taken money from, are funded rely on, big contributions and all this. So I think fixing that is an important piece of any long-term agenda for fixing our democracy and making sure that we have progressive change.
Yeah, but in the meantime, we're the ones that are going to have to push them to be bolder than they're being, and that's what we're inviting you all to join us in doing.
We're really close to time, so I just want to give you all an opportunity to, if there's any last piece of advice you have. I know people are wondering how to start this conversation, where to go next. Anything else that the three of you want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, I'll just say, they are trying to make it so that people like us feel like we can't, that we don't have power, that we can't fight for the things that we believe in, but we absolutely can. And what really gives me hope is seeing so many people who have gotten involved, who are getting involved. And you see it. You see the Democratic representatives are starting to be more aggressive. And that's because millions of people across the country have been bombarding their offices with phone calls. And people like you have been signing the petitions, making phone calls, showing up at their offices. And we need to do more. It needs to be more and stronger. But that is what gives me hope. And I think we can beat back this agenda. But it's really going to take all of us working together. And so thank you all for joining and engaging here, for volunteering, for calling a member of Congress, and for donating. All those things together are going to, working with other organizations, we're going to be able to defeat the worst of this agenda. It's just going to take all of us, and really appreciate all of you all being here.
The last thing I'll just say is somebody asked about how do you start this conversation with other people. I ask a handful of people individually, if you can, to do something simple. It could be come with me to this event, right? You might be asking them for a few hours of their time, but keep it simple, right? Come with me to do this thing. It could be, hey, I just made this phone call. Will you do this as well? It could be, hey, I'm getting weekly reminders from Food and Water Watch. So if you haven't already, text resist to 23321. And then they're in the loop and can get those reminders. So just start by asking people to do a simple thing. And then you've got a handful of you that can work together. Mark's pointing to the text opting code. Yeah, so start there and take it one step at a time.
Great.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank all three of you. Thanks everyone for being here and for asking such great questions. Please join me in thanking Emily Worth, Mark Schlossberg, and Thomas Meyer for joining us this evening. As these three have reiterated throughout the evening, Community solidarity and actions are the antidote for despair, and we're so thankful that you are all part of our community. As we've been talking about all evening, we will continue to fight big challenges in the year ahead with the Trump administration, and we will continue to do everything we can to tackle the climate crisis right now. That's exactly what Food and Water Watch does, and we know that you are all invested. If you'd like to increase the impact we can have, please consider making a donation or becoming a Food and Water Watch member today. Whether it's a one-time gift or if you sign up to make monthly donations, your gift will help get this work done. As I said before, we don't take any corporate funding, so we are not beholden to any special interests other than the health of our communities and our planet. Our support comes from people like you, and a gift today will help us continue to do this important work. And if you'd like to learn more about our work, you can register now to join us for our next Livable Future event, our March discussion for World Water Day, Microplastics in Your Water. Learn about the research and actions we're taking to protect your water from microplastics. And last, but certainly not least, please consider joining us for our upcoming benefit event. I would love to meet you all in person in May in New York City, and I hope to see every one of you here online for that virtual conference. Again, that link will be in the chat. Thank you all again for joining me tonight. Please watch your email inboxes. I will be sending out the recording of this event and all of the information that we shared in the chat this evening as well. Take care, and we'll see you all again next time.